I'm Nicole Parker, 34, from Louisville, Kentucky. I built a renewable energy startup from nothing but my family. They never saw me as enough. 2 weeks ago, my parents called. Nicole, my mom, said, her voice sharp over the phone. "You're not ready to sit with us at Christmas dinner. Not with the kind of guests we're hosting." My dad didn't even bother to soften it. "Focus on proving yourself first," he said. I hung up my chest tight and decided I wasn't begging for a seat at their table. I stayed home. While they toasted with their high society friends, I was at my desk finalizing a proposal that could change everything. That night, I flipped on the TV, and there it was, my company's solar wave splashed across the news. My deal had just shattered industry records, a $150 million contract that made heads turn. I sat there alone, watching my name light up the screen, proving them wrong. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Guess who was waiting in my office lobby, all smiles, acting like they'd always believed in me. But I'd learned something bigger than their approval could ever give me. Want to know how I turned their rejection into my victory? Stick around, because this story's just getting started. If you've ever been told you're not enough, drop your story in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss what happens next. Growing up in the Parker family was never easy. My father, David Parker, was a high-powered attorney in Louisville, the kind who commanded courtrooms and dinner conversations with the same iron grip. My mother, Linda Parker, was a celebrated journalist, her bylines in every major paper, her opinions treated like gospel at home. My older brother, Justin Parker, was their golden boy, a plastic surgeon whose name was already on billboards by 30. My younger sister, Heather Parker, was no slouch, either a fund manager who closed million-dollar deals before she could legally drink. Then there was me, Nicole, the odd one, out doodling solar panel designs in my notebook, while they debated stock markets and malpractice suits. Our family's dinner table was a battlefield of expectations. Every Sunday we'd gather in the dining room, crystal glasses clinking, and I'd sit there invisible. "Nicole, why can't you be more like Justin?" Dad would say, slicing his steak, not even looking at me. Mom would nod, adding, "Heather's already presenting to investors. What are you doing with those science projects?" My ideas about renewable energy were dismissed as childish fantasies. "It's not a real career," Heather once sneered, rolling her eyes as she checked her phone. Justin barely bothered to comment, too busy bragging about his latest procedure. I'd bite my tongue, staring at my plate, knowing they'd never understand. Those dinners shaped me, but not in the way they wanted. I'd escape to my room, sketching designs for cleaner energy, dreaming of a world that didn't run on their approval. They saw my passion as a phase, something I'd outgrow when I got serious. I was 16 when Mom handed me a law school brochure saying, "This is what success looks like." I tore it up the second she left. My defiance grew quietly, fueled by their constant comparisons. They thought they were pushing me to be better, but they were teaching me I'd never fit in. The only person who saw me was my grandfather, Harold Carter. He wasn't like the rest of them. A retired engineer, he'd built his own business from nothing, and he'd sit with me for hours listening to my ideas about solar power. "You've got something special, Nicole," he'd say, his voice, steady eyes bright with belief. "Don't let them dim your light." When I was 17, he gave me a worn-out book on renewable energy, its pages dog-eared from his own dreams. "This world needs people like you," he told me, pressing it into my hands. It was the first time I felt seen. But Harold's support couldn't shield me from the rest. At 18, during one particularly brutal dinner, Dad laid into me about my unrealistic goals. "You're wasting your potential," he said, his voice cutting deeper than usual. Heather chimed in. "Maybe if you tried harder, you'd actually matter." I pushed my chair back, heart pounding, and walked out. Mom didn't call me back. Justin didn't look up. That night, I sat in my room staring at Harold's book, promising myself I'd prove them wrong. Not for them, but for me. School wasn't much better. My teachers loved my ideas, but my grades suffered because I spent every spare minute researching solar technology. My classmates called me the dreamer, half mocking, half pitying. I didn't care. I was building something bigger than their approval, something that could change how we powered the world. But every time I went home, the weight of my family's judgment pressed harder. "You're not cut out for this," Mom said once, her tone final, like she'd already written my failure. I stopped sharing my dreams with them after that. By the time I hit 19, I was suffocating. The Parkers wanted a lawyer, a doctor, a financier, not a kid obsessed with saving the planet. Harold was the only one who kept me grounded. "They don't get to define you," he said one afternoon, sitting on his porch, his hands rough from years of work. He told me stories of his own struggles, how he'd ignored the naysayers to build his company. "You'll find your people," he promised. I clung to that, even as my family's voices echoed in my head, telling me I'd never be enough. My sophomore year of college, I made the biggest decision of my life. I was 20, studying engineering at the University of Louisville, but my heart wasn't in lecture halls or textbooks. I spent every free moment sketching designs for high-efficiency solar panels, convinced they could change how we power the world. My dorm room was a mess of notebooks, calculations scrawled on napkins, and articles about renewable energy. I wasn't chasing grades, I was chasing a vision. But that vision didn't fit the Parker family blueprint. So one spring afternoon, I walked into the registrar's office and dropped out. The fallout at home was instant. Dad called me to the living room, his face red with fury. "You're throwing your life away on some pipe dream," he shouted, slamming his coffee mug down. Mom stood behind him, arms crossed. "This is beyond reckless, Nicole," she said. "You think you're smarter than everyone else." Justin, who was visiting from his fancy clinic, just shook his head. "Good luck with that," he muttered like I was a lost cause. "Heather was the worst. You're embarrassing us." She snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. "They didn't just disapprove. They cut me off. No tuition, no allowance, no safety net. I was on my own. I packed a bag and moved into a cramped studio apartment, the kind with peeling paint and a leaky faucet. My savings were pitiful, barely enough for rent. But then my grandfather, Harold Carter, called me. He was frail, his voice weak from illness, but his words were steady. "I believe in you, Nicole," he said. Days later, he mailed me a check for $10,000, his life savings. "Build something real," he wrote in a shaky scrawl. It was the last time I heard from him. He passed away a month later, and I carried his faith like a torch. With Harold's money, I bought a used laptop, some engineering software, and a stack of books on solar technology. I named my project Solar Wave, a nod to the energy I wanted to unleash. But Louisville wasn't exactly a startup hub, and I was nobody, just a college dropout with a crazy idea. To survive, I worked nights at a diner, pouring coffee for truckers and counting tips to buy groceries. My days were spent in the library teaching myself circuit design and energy storage. I'd sketch prototypes on napkins between shifts, my hands stained with coffee and ink. The loneliness hit hard. My old classmates were posting about internships and frat parties while I was eating instant noodles in a room that smelled like mildew. I'd lie awake at night wondering if Dad was right, if I was chasing a fantasy. But then I'd open Harold's book, the one he gave me, and read his handwritten note on the first page: "Keep going." It was enough to silence the doubts, at least for a while. I started reaching out to local engineers, pitching my idea at meetups in dingy community centers. Most laughed me off. "Solar's a long shot," one guy told me, sipping his beer. "Stick to something practical." But I kept talking, kept refining my designs. I learned to ignore the rejections, to focus on the math and the physics. My first prototype was a disaster: wires fried, panels cracked, but it was mine. Every failure taught me something new, and I was getting closer. Months turned into a year. I was 21, broke and exhausted, but Solar Wave was taking shape. I had a working model, a clunky thing that generated a fraction of the power I wanted, but it was proof I wasn't crazy. I started a website, posting my designs and begging for feedback from anyone who'd listen. A few engineers responded, offering tips. One even sent me a spare battery to test. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I was building something piece by piece with no one but Harold's memory cheering me on. The Parkers didn't call. Not once. I'd see Heather's name in the business section of the paper or Justin's face on a billboard for his clinic. Mom's articles were everywhere, and Dad's cases made headlines. They were thriving while I was scraping by. But I didn't want their life. I wanted mine. Solar Wave was my rebellion, my way of saying I didn't need their approval to matter. I just needed to keep pushing one long night at a time. One late night at a coffee shop, I met Matthew Hayes. I was 23, hunched over my laptop in a corner booth surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled napkins covered in circuit diagrams. Solar Wave was still just a dream, a clunky prototype that barely worked. I was pitching my idea to anyone who'd listen, but most people walked away. Then Matthew, a lanky guy with glasses and a worn-out flannel, slid into the seat across from me. "You're the solar panel girl, right?" he asked, his voice curious, not mocking. He was an energy engineer fresh off a failed startup of his own, and he saw something in my designs. "This could actually work," he said, pointing at my screen. For the first time in years, I wasn't alone. We started working together, burning through late nights in a rented garage we called our lab. Matthew brought technical know-how. I brought relentless drive. We refined the solar panel design, aiming for efficiency no one else had cracked. 6 months in, we had a pitch deck and a prototype that didn't catch fire. Progress. Matthew suggested we look for investors. I was skeptical. Louisville wasn't exactly Silicon Valley. But he knew someone, Denise Yang, a partner at Blue Horizon Ventures. We got a meeting and I spent days practicing my pitch, my voice shaking as I rehearsed in front of a mirror. Denise was sharp, no-nonsense, asking questions that cut straight to the numbers. "You've got guts," she said, finally leaning back in her chair. "I'm in for 50,000. It wasn't much, but it was enough to officially launch Solar Wave. With Denise's money, we rented a small office, bought better equipment, and hired a couple of part-time coders. Matthew and I poured everything into our first big project, a solar panel system for a local warehouse. We worked 18-hour days troubleshooting, wiring, tweaking algorithms, and testing output. I barely slept, living on energy drinks and the thrill of being so close to something real. Matthew kept me grounded, cracking bad jokes when I got too stressed. "We're not curing cancer, Nicole," he'd say, grinning, "but we're damn close to powering a warehouse." Denise checked in monthly, pushing us to hit milestones. I felt like I was finally building something that mattered. Then it all fell apart. The warehouse installation was our big test, and we botched it. The panels overheated, frying the circuits in under a week. The client pulled out and we lost half our funding. I sat in our office staring at the charred remains of our prototype, my stomach in knots. "We're done," I told Matthew, my voice flat. I'd sunk Harold's money, my savings, and 3 years of my life into this, and it was ashes. I thought of Dad's words. "You're throwing your life away." Maybe he was right. Matthew didn't let me spiral. "Failures are data," he said, tossing a burnt wire aside. "We know what's wrong now. We fix it." I wanted to quit, but his stubborn optimism wouldn't let me. We went back to the drawing board. Matthew dug into the technical flaws: faulty heat sinks, bad voltage regulators. I focused on the math, recalculating energy yields and material costs. Denise didn't pull her funding, but her calls got colder, her emails shorter. We couldn't afford another mistake. I started reaching out to online forums, begging for advice from engineers across the country. One guy in Oregon sent us a paper on next-gen photovoltaic cells. It was a long shot, but it sparked an idea. We pivoted, designing a new panel with better heat management and higher output. It meant scrapping months of work, but Matthew was all in. "This is the one," he said, sketching a new layout on a whiteboard. The pivot wasn't easy. We were broke again, sharing a cheap apartment to cut costs. I took freelance coding gigs to keep us afloat while Matthew scavenged parts from scrapped electronics. We tested the new design in our garage, running simulations until our laptops overheated. Slowly, it started to work. The new panels hit 20% efficiency, better than anything on the market. We weren't out of the woods, but we had a fighting chance. Matthew and I became a team, not just coworkers. He didn't care about my family's judgment or my lack of a degree. He believed in solar wave, and that kept me going when I doubted myself. We were building something bigger than us, one failure at a time. 3 years later, solar wave started showing signs of life. I was no longer the broke dropout scraping by. Matthew and I had turned our garage lab into a small office with a team of 6, including coders and a part-time designer. Our redesigned solar panels were hitting 22% efficiency better than most competitors. We landed our first real contract, a $200,000 deal to install panels for a local brewery in Louisville. It wasn't millions, but it was proof we could deliver. Soon, 2 more businesses signed on, a community center and a small factory. Word spread, and industry blogs started mentioning solar wave. Promising startup one called us. I printed that article and taped it to my desk, a reminder we were getting somewhere. Denise, our investor, was pleased but relentless. "You're on the radar now," she told me during a call, her voice all business. "Don't get comfortable." She pushed us to scale, to pitch bigger clients. Matthew and I spent weeks crafting proposals targeting regional energy firms. I felt alive, like every sleepless night was finally paying off. For the first time, I thought my family might see me differently. Christmas was coming, and I pictured walking into their annual dinner head high, sharing solar wave's wins. Maybe Dad would nod with respect. Maybe Mom would ask about my work. Maybe Justin and Heather would stop looking at me like a failure. I called home in early December, hoping to confirm my spot at the Christmas dinner. Mom answered, her tone clipped. "Nicole, we're hosting important guests this year. Senators, CEOs, people who've actually made it," she said. "You're not ready to sit with them." I gripped the phone, stunned. "What do you mean? Not ready?" I asked. Dad took over. "Your little project isn't there yet," he said, his voice cold. "Come back when you've got something real to show." I tried to argue, to tell them about the brewery contract, the blogs, but Mom cut me off. "We'll see you when you're on their level," she said. The line went dead. I stood in my office, staring at the phone, my chest tight. Justin hadn't even bothered to weigh in. Heather, who I texted later, replied with a single line: "Focus on catching up." Their words burned, echoing every dinner where they'd dismissed me. I wasn't invited to my own family's table because my startup, my life's work, wasn't real enough for their elite crowd. I could have begged, could have shown up anyway, but I was done pleading for their approval. I turned off my phone and went back to my desk. That night, I threw myself into a new proposal for Nexus Solutions, a major energy company based in Kentucky. They'd reached out after reading about our brewery project, interested in our high-efficiency panels. Matthew was skeptical. They were a giant, and we were barely a blip, but I saw a chance to prove myself, not to my family, but to the world. I reworked our pitch, crunching numbers to show how our panels could cut their costs by 30%. Matthew handled the technical specs, staying up with me to refine every detail. Denise gave feedback, warning us Nexus played hardball. "They'll chew you up if you're not perfect," she said. Days blurred into nights as Christmas approached. While Louisville lit up with holiday lights, I was glued to my laptop, tweaking slides and running simulations. Matthew brought takeout to the office, joking about our festive diet of cold noodles. I barely noticed the season. My family's rejection fueled me, but so did the brewery's glowing review of our panels. We were close to something big, I could feel it. On December 23rd, I sent Nexus a draft proposal. Their lead, Susan Lin, replied within hours, asking for a meeting on Christmas Eve. "Impressive work," she wrote. "Let's see if you can deliver." I didn't tell my family about Nexus. They didn't deserve to know. While they were prepping for their high society dinner, I was preparing to pitch the biggest deal of my life. Matthew and I rehearsed until midnight, testing every slide, anticipating every question. I wasn't just fighting for solar wave. I was fighting for the years I'd been called a dreamer, a failure. Susan's email was pinned to my screen, a beacon pulling me forward. Christmas was 2 days away, and I was ready to bet everything on that meeting, even if it meant spending the holiday alone. On Christmas Day, I sat alone in front of the TV. The office was dead quiet, just the hum of my laptop and the flicker of the screen in our cramped Louisville workspace. While my family toasted with their VIP guests, I was deep in spreadsheets finalizing the Nexus Solutions proposal. Matthew had gone home to his parents, but I couldn't stop. This deal was my shot to prove I was more than their unready daughter. I'd been up since dawn, triple-checking every slide, every calculation. Our panels could save Nexus 30% on energy costs, but they wanted perfection, and I was determined to deliver. At 2 p.m., an email from Susan Lynn, Nexus's director, hit my inbox. "Solid proposal," she wrote, "but your heat dissipation system needs work. Can you fix it by tonight?" My heart sank. The heat issue was our old nemesis, the one that tanked our first project. I called Matthew, who was halfway through his mom's pecan pie. "We've got 6 hours," I said, voice tight. He didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." By 3 p.m., he was back, coffee in hand, diving into the technical specs. We tore apart the design, focusing on the cooling system. I ran simulations while he reworked the schematics, our screens glowing in the empty office. Hours blurred. I scribbled equations on a whiteboard, my hands shaking from caffeine and nerves. Matthew found a flaw in the ventilation design and suggested a new alloy for the heat sinks. This could push efficiency to 25%. He said, his eyes bright with that same spark I saw when we met. I recalculated the output, plugging in his changes. The numbers looked good, better than good. At 8 p.m., we had a new design, lighter, cooler, and more efficient than anything we'd built before. I typed up the revisions, my fingers flying, and sent the updated proposal to Susan at 9:47 p.m. "Here's the fix," I wrote, hitting send with a knot in my stomach. I collapsed onto a couch in the office, too wired to go home. The TV was on some local news channel, droning about holiday sales. Then at 10:15 p.m., my phone pinged. Susan's name flashed on the screen. "Your solution checks out," her email read. "We're signing the contract, $150 million for SolarWave to supply panels for our Midwest grid. Congratulations." I stared at the words, my breath catching. $150 million. It wasn't just a deal. It was a game changer. I called Matthew, who whooped so loud I had to pull the phone away. "We did it, Nicole," he shouted. I laughed, tears stinging my eyes, feeling Harold's belief in me from years ago. Before I could process it, the TV screen shifted. "Breaking news," the anchor said, her voice sharp. "Louisville startup SolarWave has secured a $150 million contract with Nexus Solutions, marking a record in the renewable energy sector." My name flashed on the screen, Nicole Parker, co-founder of SolarWave. They called us industry pioneers, our panels a leap forward in green tech. I sat frozen, watching my face on the news, my company's logo next to Nexus's. The brewery contract, the late nights, the failures, it all led to this. I'd done what my family said I couldn't. I thought of Dad's voice. "Come back when you've got something real." Mom's dismissal. "You're not ready." This was real. This was me proving them wrong on a stage they couldn't ignore. I didn't call them. I didn't need to. The world knew SolarWave now, and that was enough. I texted Matthew, "We're on the map." He replied with a single emoji, a rocket. Denise called minutes later, her usual cool tone replaced with excitement. "You've just shaken up the industry," she said. "Get ready for what's next." I stayed in the office, replaying the news clip, letting the weight of it sink in. The contract wasn't just money, it was validation. Every doubt, every rejection, every night I'd question myself, it all faded. I wasn't the kid they'd laughed off at dinner. I was Nicole Parker, and SolarWave was rewriting the rules. As the clock ticked past midnight, I shut off the TV, my mind already racing toward what we'd build next. The world was watching, and I was just getting started. The morning after, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. By 8 a.m., my inbox was flooded with messages from local reporters, industry blogs, and even a few competitors. SolarWave's $150 million deal with Nexus Solutions was the talk of Louisville. Social media buzzed with our name, and a local radio station called us Kentucky's Green Tech Miracle. I was still in the office running on adrenaline and cold coffee when Matthew burst in grinning. "We're trending," he said, showing me his phone. I laughed, but my mind was already on the next steps: scaling production, hiring more engineers, keeping Nexus happy. Then the receptionist buzzed. "Your family's here," she said. I froze. Dad, Mom, and Heather stood in the lobby dressed like they were headed to a gala. No Justin, he was probably too busy with his billboards. I walked out, my stomach twisting. Dad extended his hand, all smiles. "Nicole, we saw the news," he said. "What an achievement." Mom nodded, her expression softer than I'd ever seen. "We're so proud," she added, her voice almost convincing. Heather, in a tailored blazer, chimed in. "This is huge, Nicole. Really." I stood there waiting for the catch. It didn't take long. Heather leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I know some investors who'd love to meet you," she said, her eyes sharp. I could set up introductions for SolarWave's sake. There it was. They weren't here for me. They wanted a piece of my success. I clenched my fists, years of their dismissal flashing through my mind. The dinners where they'd ignored me, the years they'd called my dreams childish, the Christmas they'd shut me out. I wasn't their little girl anymore, begging for a seat at their table. "You're proud now?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. Dad raised an eyebrow like he hadn't expected me to bite back. "When I was pouring coffee to pay rent, where were you?" I turned to Mom. "When I dropped out to chase this, you said I was reckless." Heather opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "And you," Heather told me, "I'd never matter. Now you want to play matchmaker with your investor friends." The lobby went silent. Matthew, standing by the door, gave me a small nod like he knew this was coming. Dad tried to smooth things over. "Nicole, we just want to support you now," he said, his tone patronizing, like I was still a teenager. I shook my head. "You didn't believe in me when it was hard. You don't get to claim this now that it's easy." Mom's face tightened. "We're your family," she said, as if that erased everything. I stepped closer, my voice low. "Family doesn't tell you you're not enough. Family doesn't cut you off when you're trying to build something," Heather scoffed. "You're being dramatic," she said, crossing her arms. "We're here, aren't we?" I looked at them, Dad with his polished suit, Mom with her perfect posture, Heather with her calculated smile. They hadn't changed. They saw SolarWave's name in lights and thought they could waltz in, rewrite the story act like they'd always been on my side. "You're here because the news told you to be," I said. "I built this without you. I don't need your connections or your approval." The words felt like a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time, I didn't care what they thought. Dad's face reddened. "You're making a mistake," he warned. "You'll need us someday." I almost laughed. "I needed you 10 years ago. I don't anymore." Mom reached out, her voice softer now. "Let's talk this over at lunch," she said, gesturing toward the door. "We can celebrate properly." I shook my head. "I've got work to do," I said, turning toward my office. "You know the way out." Heather muttered something under her breath, but I didn't catch it. I didn't care to. As they left, Matthew walked over holding 2 fresh coffees. "That was badass," he said, handing me a cup. I smiled, but my heart was still racing. Walking away from them felt final, like closing a door I'd left cracked open too long. I sat at my desk, the Nexus contract glowing on my screen. SolarWave wasn't just a company, it was mine, built from my failures, my late nights, my defiance. I didn't need their lunch or their praise. I had Matthew, Denise, and a team that believed in me. That was enough. 6 months later, SolarWave became a household name in Louisville. Our office buzzed with new hires, and our panels powered half the city's public buildings. I was 27, no longer the kid sketching dreams on napkins. I stopped answering calls from Dad, Mom, and Heather. Their texts polite, then desperate, went unread. Justin never reached out, probably too proud. After our last confrontation, I realized I didn't need their validation. I blocked their numbers and moved on, my focus locked on building what I'd started. My world grew richer without them. Matthew was more than a partner now. He was my rock, always ready with a bad joke or a late-night brainstorm. We'd spend evenings debating panel designs, our laughter echoing in the office. Denise, our investor, became a mentor, guiding me through boardroom politics with sharp advice. "You're tougher than most CEOs I know," she told me once, her smile rare but genuine. Then there was Diane Carter, a brilliant energy scientist I met at a conference. Her passion for fusion tech matched my drive, and soon our coffee dates turned into something deeper. With her, I felt understood, not judged. I wanted to honor the one person who'd believed in me from the start, my grandfather, Harold Carter. Using SolarWave's profits, I launched the Harold Carter Scholarship Fund, a $100,000 program for young innovators in renewable energy. At the opening ceremony, I stood before a crowd of students holding the book Harold gave me years ago. "This is for dreamers who don't have a cheering section." I said, my voice steady. Diane squeezed my hand off stage, and Matthew clapped loudest, his grin wide. The first recipient, a shy 18-year-old with a solar battery prototype, reminded me of myself. I knew Harold would have been proud. Looking back, I saw the cost of my family's arrogance. They'd dismissed me as a failure, too caught up in their own success to see mine. Now they were the ones on the outside, their calls unanswered, their invitations ignored. I didn't gloat, I didn't need to. My life was full, a thriving company, a partner in Matthew, a mentor in Denise, a love in Diane. Their absence didn't leave a void. It made space for people who valued me. The biggest lesson wasn't about winning or proving them wrong. It was about knowing my worth didn't depend on their approval or anyone's. I'd spent years chasing their respect, but every rejection, every late night, every failure taught me I was enough. SolarWave wasn't just a company. It was proof that my dreams had weight, that I could build something lasting without their help. My family lost me not because I failed, but because they couldn't see me. That was their burden, not mine.